What got you interested in general and like pursuing a career in construction? Got you interested, passionate about sustainability?
For me, the sustainability passion really comes from the fact that I want to have a positive impact on the world around me, whether it's the conversations I'm having with people and the way I'm connecting, or whether it's the legacy we leave through the development that we're building.
What is net zero? What is it? What is sustainability, and why should it be important for construction companies?
We are in an industry that inherently consumes and creates. And I think the big challenge there is, how do we continue to do that? How do we support that growth, that development?
Hi guys, in today's episode, we're going to interview an industry leader in sustainability with over 15 years of experience, Lindsey Malcom, who's also an associate director at Turner Townsend. We're going to discuss some of the most pressing questions, such as what is net zero and is sustainability important, as well as how technology can help drive sustainability in the industry, and what are the greatest barriers holding the construction industry back from becoming sustainable. He also shares his best tips and advice on what professionals can do to drive sustainability initiatives in their companies. If any of this is interesting to you, don't miss out on this podcast. We bring thought leaders who talk about technology and construction, and we want you to be part of this community. Like, comment, share, and don't forget, tune in.
Lindsey, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and chatting to you.
Okay, so why don't we start off with you introducing yourself, telling us about Turner and Townsend and about your position there.
Yeah, sure. So it's, as you said in the intro, Turner Townsend are a professional services consultancy. That means we basically support clients in delivering on their projects. Primarily, we've been known in the region for cost program and project management services. And recently I joined Turner Townsend about a year and a half ago to set up our sustainability and net zero team here in the region. So my role involves looking after everything we do as a business in region around sustainability. So our own journey to net zero, but also primarily working with our clients to help them on their journey to net zero, their sustainable ambitions, looking at their environmental, social governance, their carbon emissions, or just how to get the most out of the development project they're running and deliver that in the most efficient and effective manner. So it's a really interesting space to be in, kind of directly supporting clients, helping them understand the subtleties of net zero or what they can bring onto their projects to make them more sustainable. So yeah, it's great kind of space to be working in, really interesting in the way the market's growing at the moment, and obviously a lot of challenge, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of conversations happening at different scales about how sustainability can kind of shift what we're doing and how we make the industry more efficient and more effective.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack, and I'm excited. Like, what got you interested in general and like pursuing a career in construction? Got you interested, passionate about sustainability and what you're doing today?
To be honest, it was never something I really thought about from the outset. Like I've been in the industry long enough that when I was going through university, sustainability wasn't really a degree choice. But I come from an engineering background. I've always been interested in problem solving in construction. I'm a bit of a geek for Lego, so ever since I could sort of sit on the floor and play by myself, I've been building things. And I think that probably subconsciously has led me into construction. But for me, the sustainability passion really comes from the fact that I want to have a positive impact on the world around me, whether it's the conversations I'm having with people and the way I'm connecting, or whether it's the legacy we leave through the development that we're building. And I think it's becoming very clear that we have to take action to address climate change, and there's huge potential in this region to to do that. So that for me, it's driven my career in a way, is sort of step by step trying to have a greater level of impact to support clients on the journey they're taking and to sort of shift the needle around where we need to be versus where we actually are, in terms of things like carbon emissions, in terms of health and well-being, in terms of sort of net zero.
Okay, and so jumping in to another kind of, I think, really important question. What is net zero? What is it? What is sustainability? And why should it be important for construction companies?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key question, isn't it? It's sort of understanding that importance and the relatability of that, I think, for clients and for companies here. Scientifically speaking, net zero is the idea of reducing our emissions, our environmental impact, in line with the Paris Agreement, which sort of set out the need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, and doing that in a scientific and measurable manner. More relatably, I guess, is that net zero is about trying to reduce the impact that we have. What are we consuming in terms of resources? What are we putting out into the world in terms of waste and emissions? And how do we reduce that to the greatest possible extent so that we are not causing adverse impacts on the climate and the world around us? And then whatever's left over after we've made that reduction, how do we offset that impact by carbon removal or abatement measures? So it's really kind of the getting that clear understanding that makes it important for clients, particularly in the construction space. We are in an industry that inherently consumes and creates. And I think the big challenge there is, how do we continue to do that? How do we support that growth, that development, particularly in the Middle East market, in such a way that we can do it in a sustainable manner? That's the key challenge, really.
Okay. And what would you say is, for a construction company, maybe, they're concerned, obviously they care about the environment to an extent, but, they're just trying to do business and they're having all these different regulations and these different requirements. Where does sustainability, let's say, meet practicality for the construction companies? Like, why should they really care from their end?
That's a really good question. And I think it's the challenge for construction is that we often are focused on what we're doing as an individual business, or what our individual role is, whether you're the project manager, the developer, the contractor, the designer. But we actually, I think, need to look at a broader picture and have conversation and engagement across the whole development life cycle. And actually, as a company working in the construction industry, thinking not just what do we do now at this phase of the process, but how do we support other stakeholders within the built environment, or other users of the building, or the designer or the developer? How do we actually work together in a collaborative manner to deliver this efficiently? Like, I think there's definitely a kind of a mindset in the industry focused on what are we doing and how are we influencing that. But I think we need to shift the perspective a little bit more, being longer term, looking at sort of the full life cycle, and kind of using that as a way to show that you'll have greater value, you'll have greater impact and greater benefit by making sustainable decisions now in the short term, and finding mechanisms to sort of support that decision making that allow everybody in the value chain to see benefit from it. Not just saying, okay, well, we'll do this, but it's going to cost us more upfront. That means we're going to spend more money now, and we're not really going to see the impact of that. It's going to be for others down the line. Sort of addressing that imbalance a little bit. Because I think the way that we manage procurement here, the way that we deliver development, is very focused on the immediacy, on what's happening now, and trying to sort of change that mindset, trying to have alternative models and perspectives and viewpoints to say, actually, let's think longer term here. Let's make sure that we understand what we're doing and what the legacy of that impact is, I guess.
How can technology play a role in making the industry more sustainable?
I think there's probably sort of 2 or 3 key areas where technology can really sort of drive sustainability. In the first instance, I think you've got kind of the fundamentals around efficiency, and that's something we've seen as a natural occurrence over the past few decades is new technologies or new solutions come forward and make existing tech more efficient, it uses less resources, or it's easier to make, or whatever it might be. But that kind of efficiency piece kind of drives things. I think the next area is in around the sort of the ability to bring to the fore innovation and new solutions. So actually breakthrough technologies kind of change the way that we manage things, or change the perspective or the approach that really drives a push in emissions reduction, or changes resource consumption models. And I'd say the third thing, and this is an area we maybe don't always think about from a kind of design and development perspective, but the third thing is around process, and actually what is the construction process that we're following, what's the design process that we're following, and how technology shifts that. And I think things like the use of building information modeling, digital twins is one example, but also the kind of 4D programming and smart management on construction sites really helps facilitate that too, and actually changes the way that we're doing things so that they become more efficient. But I think it's also important to sort of have a little caution when we talk about technology. We do have to kind of recognize that technology can help fix some of the challenges we face around sustainability and emissions reduction, but it can't just be a band-aid. Like, we actually need to address the causes, not just address the symptoms. And I think there's a tendency in some areas of the construction industry to sort of look at tech as a way to mitigate an impact that's already happened, rather than necessarily sort of trying to reduce the impact in the first instance.
What would you say is a good example of something you're familiar with that brings some more efficiency to the process? Like, and is there anything that is more particular, like a bigger opportunity, more efficiency, and a certain part of the construction process, or like something particular?
Okay, I think my background is very much on the kind of operational performance side of things with buildings, looking at sort of energy and water use, looking at how you predict that at the design stage, how do you manage that in operation. And I think some good examples in that space are the idea of sort of EC motors and fan coils shifting the dial on the fan energy usage that we see in buildings, which historically has been a big challenge. LED lighting being another good example of that kind of simple efficiency mechanism. It just reduces what you're consuming. I think what we're starting to see increasingly, which is where it gets more interesting, is how the kind of layer of controls and sensing sits on top of that and supports that. So you get that kind of digital management of buildings, using the data that comes back from the building as a feedback loop to help you kind of change what you're using and what you're consuming through the course of the day. And there's a lot that gets thought about that during design stage. There's a lot of like modeling and analysis that can show the value. I think there's a little bit of an implementation gap that sometimes comes up, where we lose that efficiency benefit in operation because the systems aren't optimized or used in the best fashion. But I think, and that ties into where we see a lot of innovation around tech at the moment, is in that controls, that monitoring, that digital space, where it's okay, yeah, we know to move air around the building, to cool a building, to light a building. The processes for that are pretty well established, but the way that we control and shift that in response to building needs, or in response to time of day, that's where we're starting to see some really interesting innovation and some smart solutions, and linking that into things like health and well-being and comfort and stuff as well.
Okay, so we're moving on to another question, and I'd love to know, what are the greatest hurdles that's holding back sustainability in the construction industry, from your opinion?
I think the biggest hurdles is probably two things. One is around a kind of short-term focus. I think the way that the construction industry delivers development is very much about, let's get it built, let's get it occupied, let's get people in it. And I think we need to take more of a life cycle perspective, looking at how do we create spaces and buildings that can be flexible, that can adapt to change. It's not just, I put some money into this, I want to get it built, and I want to start getting revenue back. But I think that applies both for kind of the development delivery model, but also for the way that design and construction's approached by developers, by contractors, by all of us in the industry, really. And I think the second biggest hurdle, and this supports the first in a way, but the second aspect is around the visibility and understanding of the impacts that we have and the lack of data that is available to really show, if you make this change, this is the value that can come from it. Because all too often we have conversations with clients, whether it's us in a sustainability space or our colleagues from a tech perspective coming in saying, we've got this great idea, we'd like to do this. And the client's like, okay, but what's the value of that? How does that work? What's the benefit? How do we demonstrate where this is going to be worth us exploring? And clients rarely have a clear understanding of how their buildings are performing. As an industry, we don't always understand sort of what happens during the design and construction from a sort of impact perspective. And so having that data, being able to really see this is what we're doing, this is where we can start to shift things and have benefit, to really quantify the impacts, I think is really key.
So I think you're referring here to data, which is something that is even relatively a concept that is relatively new to the construction industry to an extent. What is the importance of data when considering introducing sustainable practices? Like, what would you say is, like, first of all, question, is data important, and if so, why is it so important?
Yeah, I mean, it's an often quoted line, but I think there is the saying that you can't reduce what you can't measure is a very kind of common phrase in sustainability circles, and it's a really key point. Like, if we don't know what it is that we're doing, we're not going to be able to shift that. And something we talk a lot about within Turner and Townsend, like, clients are used to measuring projects in terms of cost and program and quality. And cost and program are really tangible things. The number of person hours on site, the days, the months, the weeks to completion. Your cost is a very, very tangible thing. And it's the same then when you want to bring sustainability to the table and say, actually, let's put carbon emissions in the mix here. Let's say, what's the carbon impact of the decisions we make during concept, the process we take during construction, the choice to bring in one particular operation team or a different, the leasing model or tenant model that we have. What's the carbon impact on that? And the challenge there is that we don't have that legacy of data and understanding and experience in carbon across the industry as a whole to be able to really bring that data to the table. And that means we can't make informed decisions in the way that we'd like to. And so that becomes the big challenge then, is that without the data, you can't always justify the choice between decision A and decision B. And then it becomes a case of, well, this is my perspective, this is what I think from my experience. And clients, when they're putting a lot of money on the line, they're not always going to take your professional perspective on things. They're like the data and the numbers to back it up. And so that's for me is kind of the key thing for the lack of data. And it is something that's changing, right? There's a lot that's happening to try and get greater data or greater understanding, but we're still early days, as you say.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like, from the data angle, is if you look at almost any other industry, we live in an age of the data economy. There's so much, people are in the business of, just the business of trading with data. If you're like looking at all the biggest companies in the world, Google trades data. And, if you think about it, the construction industry sits down on a gold mine of unutilized data, and also uncaptured data. So and in terms of, like, the sustainability applications, or the ability to even plan ahead, I find it to be a really fascinating space. So yeah, it's very insightful. What do you think is the future of the construction industry? What's that going to look like? How can technology also help shape a future?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. Possibly slightly controversially, like, I think there's one future for the construction industry where we're not building anything new at all. And that's definitely an alien concept in this region, but that could be the most sustainable future, where actually we're not consuming additional resources. We're not having increased impacts. But I think more practically speaking, we are likely to shift to more of a kind of closed loop resource management, regeneration, renewal type perspective of things. Like we're running out of land and resources if we continue it the same way. So the future has to be more sustainable inherently. It has to have efficient use of materials, introduction of new materials. And I think this is where technology will shape things, is the sort of the processing of material, the management, even things like the awareness. One of the conversations that comes up quite regularly in the industry is around understanding materiality in buildings and the ability to deconstruct buildings at the end of life and reuse what's in them. There's a lot of tech work that's happening to kind of quantify, measure, and monitor that with things like building information passports or building material passports. And that's where the digital twins can support that too, to sort of say, here's what we have and how it can be reused. And I think using new technologies and ideas to kind of track and monitor what we've got shifts that perspective a little bit more to be actually, where can we reuse, where can we optimize, how can we change the spaces that we've got or refurbish them to suit a new purpose, and keeping the focus on people and on the environment. Like we're building buildings and infrastructure to support people and lifestyles, and we need to make sure that we keep that people focus. And as we're changing and adapting to the changing climate around us, we need to keep the environmental focus as well.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting. I never really heard that answer before, but you're saying there is the way, at least, or to the rate that we are building right now, that's going to need to change. And there's kind of, like, I mean, the way you're describing it is really like, you don't have to build that much more, you just have to repurpose it. What we're building right now, or how we're building or using the materials, whether it's repurposing maybe at the end of a life cycle of an asset, of recycling the different components, and technology could help with that, potentially the digital twin, or it means taking an asset that, is maybe office spaces in a lot of areas that have become less useful, and repurposing that for residential, and kind of having a very different outlook in general about the industry. Did I get that right?
Yeah, completely. And seeing the hidden value in what we've got. Like I imagine there could be a point in the future, for example, if you decide you want to buy a villa, then you're not just buying the land and the home that somebody's designed, but it's actually the steel frame that's there, the concrete that's gone into the construction, the glass in the windows, even the rare metals that are in the motors in the fan coil units. Like that becomes your possession, and that has a value at the end of life. If we think about how challenging it is to extract and process materials for electronics and for batteries and those kind of things, like the value that we have then in that asset becomes really important. And start to recognize that, and you scale that up to a high rise, or you scale it up to something, say, the size of a mall and a hotel complex. There's a lot of added value in there that we don't really think about at the moment. And the challenge is, can we leverage that value down the line to be able to sort of approach things in a more sustainable way? So have that longer term perspective. So this is what we can get in the future if we build it in a way that it's accessible later. So
that's really interesting. And I mean, there is so much to dive into just on this topic. What I think I had a while back a conversation with the guys from Masdar, and they were describing how in the early days they wanted to recycle all of their waste, or at least a big part of it. And one of the requirements from the subs and the contractors that were working is that they need to use the waste, or I'd say they actually paid them to use the waste, and after a certain amount of time to use it, to recycle it for, I forgot the exact example, but at some point it shifted, and the contractors started paying Masdar for the waste because they wanted to start using it and apply it, for these different sustainable materials. And I think that's like a shift that's really interesting. You're buying a home, you're looking at it, if you need to demolish that's it. That's today it's a liability, it's a cost for the owner. But maybe, if it's done right and it's thought of at the construction phase, this is an opportunity. No, you're going to be able to sell off those components and that house is going to be worth something. So it's mind blowing. Yeah, that's really interesting. As someone who works with startups a lot, what tip would you give them when pitching their products to construction companies or firms like yourselves?
For me, I think the key is always around storytelling. The way I see what I'm doing at the moment is that we're a little bit of a startup ourselves within a big multinational business. Like sustainability, it's a relatively new consideration for Turner Townsend, particularly here in the Middle East. And we're trying to kind of find our way, understand how we fit into what we're doing, to what our clients are doing. And the best engagement and connectivity we get is when we can show what the value is for the client or for our stakeholders, both internally and externally, but also being able to differentiate that, recognizing that there's different stakeholders within a client business. And so how you connect with the head of ESG might be different to how you connect and communicate with the head of development, with the head of finance, really being able to articulate what you do, how that would bring value, but changing that narrative and refining that narrative depending on who you're talking to. Like there's the old adage in business about having kind of your 30-second elevator pitch. But I feel like almost these days we're kind of coming with a set of elevator pitches. It's like, oh, so you work in the ESG space. Great. I can talk to you in this language about these aspects. Or actually you're coming at this from a development perspective and timeline and delivery is really important to you. So let's talk about this and how we fit into that context. Really being able to tune what you're wanting to say and what you want to communicate such that the audience you're talking to can recognize that, can hear that and appreciate it.
So would you the storytelling aspect here is critical. And I think you also referred to the kind of the positions of different types of people that they might be needing to pitch to. What would you say if I'm a startup, I'm thinking about developing a sustainable, a sustainable technology, kind of a product that's focused on sustainability or making either materials or some sort of, or focused on energy consumption. Like how would you, and who would be the right kind of person usually in construction groups or even in Turner Townsend, even by you guys, who would it be smart for them to reach out to? What would be the smartest way to approach it?
I think I would always try and target the head of sustainability or head of ESG where there is one. So somebody who in the first instance understands what you're trying to do and the importance of that. But I think engaging with them to then understand what's your delivery model or what's your internal structure or what's your engagement process. Like how do I can explain to you because you understand this, but who else should I be talking to? I think that first foot in the door is really key. But I think then using that to identify who are the decision makers, who's going to actually say, yes, okay, let's take this new concept and trial it on a project. Is that somebody who's on the development side of things? Is it on the delivery side of things? Is it operational? Or do I actually need to get a coffee with the CEO and get them on board and for them to go, yeah, let's do this, or the chief innovation officer? That's always the key thing for us, is like who talks our language and then who can they direct us to afterwards.
So the head of ESG is going to be the internal, like the champion for the startup, and then the goal is to kind of get pointed in the right direction. And is there a certain, did I get that right?
Yeah, and the challenge that comes with that, of course, is that everybody's doing the same thing. So as soon as you've got a sustainability lead, head of ESG, something like that in your title, every company in the world is trying to reach out to you. And that's the second big challenge. It's like, okay, how do I make my voice heard above the noise?
So what would you say? Give him a tip. Give him the
I think having something unique, knowing who your competitors are and knowing how you differentiate from them. Because and it's certainly for me, sitting in more of a kind of professional services space, I know the market quite well. I know what most people are doing, and I've worked for other companies here. So being able to say, well, I know this, and this is where we differentiate ourselves. And sometimes the conversation goes down the road of them saying, okay, but what I need is X. And I'm like, okay, fine. You are better to go talk to somebody else about that. That we can support, but yeah, your current consultant or these people on your framework, they can provide that in a better way than we could. So knowing your value add, knowing what others are doing, and knowing your own limits, I think that's the key three things for me.
Okay, if you could wave a magic wand and build tomorrow a solution that you think is like, come on, where is it? What's going on? What would that be?
Oh, wow. That's a great question. I think something that could pull together all of the data that's just inherently created by our industry and aggregate it into an accessible way so that we can see what's happening at every stage. That would be hugely powerful. I think more practically speaking, if somebody can invent zero carbon concrete, I think that would take the construction industry a long way down the road it needs to go, because that's our single biggest problem at the moment. Like the emissions from cement, I think are probably, if cement was equivalent to a country, it would be second or third on the list, I think, in terms of the highest emitting countries in the world. And so actually addressing that would do a huge amount of work for the construction industry. But yeah, that's kind of my thought.
Okay, I have so many more questions, but we'll move on. So what advice would you give to a construction professional who wants to get involved and lead sustainable initiatives in their company, or even pursue a similar career path to what you're doing today?
My first bit of advice would be do it. Like, don't stop thinking about it. Just go ahead and do it. There's too few people at the moment within the industry with sustainability on their mind. And I think we're in a space, going back to what we were talking about earlier about the future construction industry. I think one future is that there isn't a role for a sustainability professional anymore in the industry, because everybody in the industry is working in a sustainable manner. And I think so if anybody wants to sort of lead sustainable initiatives within their companies, they should definitely go ahead and do it. I think understanding what the impacts are and the value it can bring and being able to communicate that to your internal stakeholders is really key. I think being specific about what you want to do and why you want to do it is important. And I think also we've talked a lot about emissions, about net zero and things like that, but recognizing that sustainability isn't just environmental, it also leads into social considerations, it leads into governance. And so pushing things like transparency and disclosure, pushing things like equality and inclusivity is also a really important consideration within the industry.
Okay, so I think we've managed to cover a lot in this podcast. I think there's you shared some really insightful perspectives, and I want to thank you for getting on the podcast, and I thank you for sharing your perspective. Lindsey, thank you very much.
Thank you too. It's been an absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it and really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about all of these things. So thanks.
And guys, anyone who wants to leave comments, like, comment, share, subscribe, leave comments so we can engage with you. We can answer some questions. Lindsey, if someone wants to reach out or share their latest product or tech solution, what would be the smartest way for them to try to reach you?
Easiest way would be through LinkedIn. Connect with me. My contact details are on there, so you can drop me an email as well.
Okay, solid. Guys, thank you very much for tuning in. And we'll see you in the next episode.